This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Good morning. Thank y'all for being here. This is the Language of Grace workshop, number 415. So if you were looking for something else, now is a time to run out. But I'm so glad you are all here today. We are going to do some interactive stuff, which I will explain in just a minute. And there will be a QR code that will pop up on the screen that will be easier to scan if you would like to do that in just a moment. But first, a little bit of introduction. So who am I? My name is Elizabeth Bowler Landis, and I am an educator pastor. I am currently in between calls, so I get to just have fun and explore ministry right now and do all of the things that I would love to do that you don't necessarily have time to do, but they don't pay, like serving at the presbytery level. So I currently serve as our Children and Youth Ministry Committee co-moderator, and as part of a planning for children's weekend retreats on their leadership team. I also am serving as the vice moderator on our Presbytery Council. So lots to do there. My favorite moments in ministry are those aha moments when whatever you're doing and you can just see the brain working and you find like somebody gets it, they get something, or they take the next step, or they ask that hard question because you know their brains are going, and that just being a part of that is a blessing. So I have been in educational ministry in some form or fashion, volunteer or paid, since 2005, when I started summer camp counseling at Mo Ranch Summer Camp. And I did that for 3 summers, as well as going to school and all that comes with that. So that totals that I've been in educational ministry for around 17 years. And this is my 13th APCE event. So now I want to know a little bit about who you are and who is in this room with us, because we all bring different perspectives, and also who is online. This is a hybrid workshop. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. So we have colleagues on Zoom with us who are also going to be interacting through these slides in just a few moments with us. So in order to do that, we are using what's called AHA slides, similar to Menti, like we just did in worship. But there's a QR code that you can scan. If that is not working for you, if you go to ahaslides.com/9S31E, that will log you in. And so you will see these slides that are up here also on your phone. And when they're interactive, there are time limits on them, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on the interactives. They're like polls, like click a box. So do be fairly quick. I still see some in the room connecting. Is everybody able to connect in here? Everybody on Zoom good to go? As far as we know, let us know on Zoom if you are having any troubles. We have a Zoom monitor, Hannah Garrity. I should have introduced her. She will read any questions or comments you have that you can put in the chat box throughout, and we hope that you will join in the interaction. So let's get to know each other. What state are you from? You can put your country instead. I apologize that I limited it to states. So as this word cloud developed, you can see that we are from all over. We all bring unique perspectives with us from our ministry, context of where we live. So how do you serve in your educational ministry? I misjudged the amount of time it would take to do these polls, but I can add more time. So we have a wide range of people serving in different contexts and different areas. How many years have you been in educational ministries? So we have quite a few people with lots and lots of experience. And then we also have some that are just getting started in their careers or volunteer paths. And where is your ministry focus? Even if you oversee one area, you tend, or all, like if you're like a full birth cradle to grave, then, but there's still like a place that you tend to want to focus. So if you serve in cradle to grave, choose the area where you would prefer, where your strengths are, where your passion is, what age, if you could choose, what would you pick? So we don't have as many in youth as I would have thought. We have a lot in children as training and mentoring and adults. Okay, so that's it for now on those. But before we can begin, we've got to make sure that we understand kind of what we're talking about when we say grace. So my goal for this workshop isn't to answer any specific questions. It's not to say this is the way it needs to be done. It's to begin a conversation around the word grace and how we embody it and teach it and model it beyond words. It's a word that we use all the time in and out of the church. We hear it in the secular world. We see it in TV shows. We see it and hear it happening as well as in the church. And so I wanted a quick definition. So I went to dictionary.com. There are 15 definitions for the word grace. And then it lists another 7 definitions for common idioms. So we really could be saying anything when we say grace. So how do we know exactly what we mean when we say this word? Or if we use the idioms, what's the difference between by the grace of God and but for the grace of God? What do we mean when we say, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you? Is that another different use of the word? Normally, we would know what we mean by that word because of the context we're in or the larger thing. But when we're teaching this to someone, whether they're a child, a youth, an adult, a leader, we don't teach it with our words. We teach it with our actions. Okay, so we're going to lay our foundation together. And there's another slide coming up for you to create a word cloud of what grace is. So finish the sentence, grace is, with 1 or 2 words, keep them short. And you can do it as many times as you would like until you've run out of thoughts. In the back, can y'all see the word cloud clearly? Okay. Okay, was thinking I would read some of these smaller words for sure. The words get bigger as more and more people type them. So as we can see, the word forgiveness has stayed right in the center. So forgiveness is at the center of grace. It is what we all seem to bring as grace is. Grace is forgiveness. Grace is a gift. Grace is free. Grace is God, is rest, in spite of, is a second chance, is blessed. Grace is who God created us to be. It's encompassing. I can't read the word, but I can say it. It's given, it's being fully present. It's our secret weapon. It's release, smoothness, life-giving, second chance, gentleness, abundant, understanding, shocking, witness, empathy, unconditional, a gift from God, patience, amazing, belonging, patience, mercy, calm, freedom, recognition, freeing, freely given. Grace is letting others lead. Grace is a big word. It's powerful. All of these things are things that we can't really teach with words. This is about actions. It's about what we do. So I went ahead too far. I argue that the language of grace is not words. It's how we interact with each other. It's an embodied thing. The language of grace is embodied. I like to read quotes. These little bits from larger pieces intrigue me. They send me to the larger piece to read sometimes, but sometimes it's just the quote that I really like. And they make me think. So I brought some of these quotes. It's a collection. So as I read them, listen for these words that we just defined grace as in the quotes. See, as you listen, what keeps coming to the surface in the theme of grace through these quotes? What's missing? Ernest Hemingway says, courage is grace under pressure. John Updike says, rain is grace. Rain is the sky descending to the earth. Without rain, there would be no life. Anne Lamott says, I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. Martin Luther King Jr. says, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love, and you can be that servant. Jeff Buckley said this, grace is what matters in anything, especially life, especially growth, tragedy, pain, love, death. That's a quality I admire very greatly. It keeps you from reaching out for the gun too quickly. It keeps you from destroying things too foolishly. It sort of keeps you alive. So I read that quote and then had to go look up who Jeff Buckley is. So in case anyone else does not know this name, he is a American singer-songwriter. Pope Francis says, grace is not part of consciousness. It is the amount of light in our souls, not knowledge or reason. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says, denial helps us to pace our feelings of grief. There is a grace in denial. It is nature's way of letting in only as much as we can handle. Mary Angelou says, grace is like a lake of drinkable water right outside your door, but you stay inside and die of thirst. Our brief statement of faith in the APCE USA says, in life and death, we belong to God. Through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit, we trust in the one triune God, the Holy One of Israel, whom alone we worship and serve. But grace is not anything goes, as we've seen. Grace holds us accountable for our actions. It doesn't seek revenge. Rather, it seeks reconciliation. Grace makes space for forgiveness, for a new way forth. It makes space for empathy, for compassion, for mercy. When grace leads the way, a new future is realized. There is this tradition in Japanese culture where a bowl or pottery, when it is broken, the pieces are gathered back together, and instead of being thrown away, they are reconnected to form something new. I forgot the name of this practice. If any, say it again. Kintsugi. Kintsugi. Brings the pieces back together in a more beautiful way. It doesn't try to hide the brokenness. You're not trying to fit it all together perfectly and trying to hide the cracks. You're showing the story. So grace is this embodied grace are these gold streaks in our life. We don't try to cover it up. It's not forget and let go. and forget. It's mend, it's bring back together. It's find a new way forward. So we all have lots of stories of embodied grace, and I have a few that I will share. When my oldest was little, he had grabbed a glass bowl and was running through the house and dropped it. So I could have gotten upset, which I did actually, and then turned around, took a breath, and said, "Are you okay? Did you get cut? Okay, let's get some shoes on. Let's clean this up." And getting down on the floor and cleaning it up. Never did I say, "I'm going to show you grace." I just did it. Or when we experience grace being given to us when we miss a deadline and someone says, "That's okay. We can work through it. How can I help you finish up this task?" Or when you notice a friend is filled with anxiety or anticipation and you change your plans in the spur of the moment to meet them where they are. That is grace. Or recently, leading worship, I had uploaded the wrong document to my iPad. And I went to the baptismal font to lead a reaffirmation of faith, and I looked at my script and it was not there. And so there was, as I was looking for it, the congregation was patient with me and showed me grace, and nobody said anything about it on the way out their door. So that was grace. We all have these stories. The thing they hold in common is that it's embodied. We never say in those moments, "I'm showing you grace." We teach it in the classroom. We say, "This is grace. Look at this story and see where grace happens. See the grace God showed us. See the grace the people are showing to one another." But then it comes alive in our embodiment. So we don't say to that toddler, "I know you dropped the bowl you were not supposed to have while running through the house, but I'm going to show you grace and you're not going to get in trouble." You just get down on the floor and you clean it up. And in that moment of embodied grace, we give another person the opportunity to express whatever's going on. We show them empathy. We show them kindness. We listen. We work towards forgiveness and reconciliation. So grace paints the world with these gold streaks. It mends it. It doesn't seek to hide it or to repair it. It seeks to blend it in and create something new. So I thought we were out of the hair cutting stage in my house, but my 9-year-old needed a pair of scissors for school, and I handed them to him and he went to put them in his backpack, and on his way there, he took the front of his hair and cut a huge chunk out of it. But it was bedtime, so I didn't notice. He went to bed. The next morning, he got up for school, fixed his hair, which is abnormal, and he came out and he smelled like hairspray so much that my eyes burned. I was like, "We need to learn how to use the hairspray," as he was like, "Oh, I just wanted to fix my hair today." And then that night I was helping him comb his hair, and he has grown out long hair that was almost to his chin. And I found it. I found this chunk of hair missing, and straight into the front, covered his face, made him look like bangs. And I was like, "We can't have this haircut, kiddo. We're going to have to go get it cut." And I could see in that face the sadness and sorrow that was coming with losing something he loved. And so I said, "We'll contact a good stylist and we'll see what they can do." And the next morning he got up and he said, "If I could go back in time and tell myself, I'd say, don't cut your hair." Those are moments of grace. And we took him and we got it blended in, and I still can't handle it, so he has to get it cut again. But that's a whole nother story. It's not easy to show grace. It's not easy to embody it in those moments when we've been hurt, when someone says something to us or does something that breaks our hearts, or we see in the world all the things happening. It is hard to live embodied grace. But that's what we're called to do. We're called to paint the world with these gold streaks, to mend, to bring about reconciliation. Okay, so I've talked a lot at y'all, and now I want it to be much more interactive. And so for the next 10 minutes, we're going to, maybe 15, we're going to break into some small groups. So if you are one or two at a table, you may want to blend with another one, or you can have a small group. And Zoom, you will be put into breakout rooms to have these conversations. So as you are thinking about embodiment of grace, these are the questions I present to you, but take it where you want. So think about and discuss, how do we intentionally model grace in our ministries? It's different when we are intentional about embodying it than when it just happens. There's a sincerity to it, and it becomes much more of a teachable moment when it's intentionally a path forward. And then grace seeps into our souls. And so how do we live in our everyday lives so that our actions reflect the words of grace we speak? All right. Or anything else about grace and embodied that you are led to discuss in your groups?
I think it's, I always like that point because like this, I hope we're not being too like self-skeptical of ourselves. That like, well, it's more but also just more. And always I think about, for example, too, but the best time to show grace is the time. Essentially not athletes. I think it's showing. Know what race looks like. I think the What I fear. I struggle with
Have a little bit of like, I mean, that's a little bit more recent there.
You that just like immediately. Doesn't necessarily. Nope. Not, well, yes. Right. And part of it is literally. You're giving yeah, and so again, but then there was one time, came in, sat, and started shooting. Oh, it's good. And so I immediately started on the wall, like, okay, I'm here, I'm listening. And he started talking about and so, which, you know, I also have the chip on my shoulder. I just remember thinking, I think I wouldn't do what I was called. That showed that this person struggling with themselves. I don't for that kind of things that it's about based on access to not everyone. This isn't me saying that I'm in this doesn't happen. But to be open, if my so it's so hard to like listen. You were literally just something yeah. Money and you know, the idea of like having a story of what you're doing to do. So, but also that shows you what you because like you no longer have And so, so I don't Jen, and then where you decide. Okay, so that's a trick out there. Yeah.
Are you three right now? No, we know each other from Montreal and family and things. Yeah. I don't know, our last 20 years. Yeah. We didn't grow up together.
And I worked with Anna with summer. She's she still gives me, she gave me one.
Okay, y'all have about 3 more minutes.
I've literally seen people put like, you know, when we transition from green into an item, then I saw people just putting it back in. You, which, can you please roll it and put it where it says I need to. Yeah.
I understand that $1,000. Yes. Why you just name the room like church bus every year?
Well,
There's a sign.
So we literally did that in pilot. We finagled it because we have this, we had one of have this basement of our college football. And so right now, so we share one of the the organizations that uses our campus during the week. It's a lady have centralized all the spatial space. Essentially, disabled adults. And we had one meeting what's that. And so we finagled that designated. Well, it is where the children would meet that was usable. And it's also. It wasn't PC, but developmentally also the children. So we served them as well. And so, you know, it's crazy to look at that we go do this, to be able to actually use the funds that you have.
For what you need.
For what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also not remembering, and I sat with him, I looked after with him, so you could get the word done. And I remember the rules he gave me, we were like, he has to do, anytime we do a loose dance, he has to do it. If I remember, I would sit there and just kind of like hanging out. And it would be playing outside the office on the runs, and I'd hear the group dance start. I'm like, "What your group dance?" He's like, "Go ahead." That's what your mom said.
Mom said we have 2 different days.
And you go and do it, and you do it. It was honestly truly, it was one of my favorite nights because.
Okay, let's come back together. Our Zoom friends are back in their large group. And I want to know what y'all talked about in your small groups. So the best way I thought we could do this, since we are hybrid, is through an interactive slide option. So if you'll get your device back out you're using. It says in 2 to 3 sentences, share with the whole group something you talked about in your small group discussion. So what questions came up? What ideas did you brainstorm? If you are still typing, please continue, but I'm going to go ahead and start reading some of the answers that have come in. The yes and model is grace-filled. Church is a place where we root for each other. Not to be so critical of ourselves. It is sometimes hardest to show grace to ourselves. What we'd easily forgiven in others, we beat ourselves up over. Extending grace to families that have not fully returned to worship and activities. Sharing moments of practicing grace. Showing grace to yourself. How do we show grace to ourselves? That's a good question. It is easier to show grace with children than it is with adults, in our ministries rather than our houses, and especially than ourselves. Grace is giving more freedom to children to create a safe space. Grace is not the desire to need to try and control or direct what you want children to do. Be in the moment with those to whom we are extending grace. How we embody grace through a second breath before we have a knee-jerk reaction. Not to be so critical of ourselves. Often we want grace, but struggle to give it to others. Self-compassion. Grace can often mean holding back what you want to say or do in a space to make way for what God wants to say or do. Seeing the pain of another and thinking about what that person needs. It can be easier to show grace to children than to adults. Grace extends to ourselves. Sometimes we need to give ourselves grace the most. How can we embody grace with intention? Boundaries should be grace-filled. Embrace the technology that reaches people no longer in or able to be in the pews to share God's grace. Sharing aha moments and ask what people are struggling with. Sharing grace with children versus conforming them. Self-compassion. We can show grace through our behavior, even though our feelings may reflect something else. There are boundaries sometimes with grace, but even boundaries can mean you are showing grace. Grace shown through pastoral care, showing people grace as they return from the pandemic, not pouncing on them and accusing them as they come back. The potential for compassion burnout when you may give too much. Reframing grace to still be integrous to ourselves. Not sure is that the right word? Integral, integrous. I don't know that word. Grace is noticing each other. So much of the world does not offer grace. We need to keep offering it. What does it mean for a church to have grace for those who decide to do other things instead of coming to church? Especially when those other choices are people groups not offering grace. Body of Christ. Showing grace means taking the punishment for unruly teens. Embodying grace is truly countercultural in our gotcha media and political environment. In order to fully receive grace, you have to fully give it to everyone. Easier to give grace to others, not yourself, or to children rather than adults. Grace is loving our enemies and realizing they need our love. Remembering that things are cyclical. plant seeds so when the time comes, people will know the church is a place that will always be available, offering God's love and grace. These are beautiful. This is embodied grace. This is living it. Ooh, another one came in. You have to show grace to yourself before you can show it to others. All right. How many of us often show grace to ourselves? No hands in the room. Anyone on Zoom, raise a hand. Probably not. Yeah, we don't show grace to ourselves. That might be the hardest piece of grace, to embody it for ourselves, to give ourselves a moment to breathe, to think, to give ourselves patience. Like that moment in worship when I couldn't find the liturgy for the reaffirmation of baptism, I was kicking myself and trying to keep patient and smile on my face. But all I really wanted to do was run and hide because I had messed up. And I shouldn't mess up. I'm the one in charge. I'm supposed to be leading. I should have everything together. I couldn't give myself grace in that moment. It took a few days to get past that before I was really back. But everyone else around me showed grace to me and didn't bring it up at all. Oh, we struggle with it for ourselves. Another theme that came up is different ages are harder to show grace to. And that sometimes it's hard. So when is it hard to show grace? If you want to type it in, we can see. Hmm. I'm seeing a theme emerge among these answers. To myself became the center word pretty quickly. And the couple of themes pulling is when we, as the person showing grace, is not whole. We're exhausted, or we're unwell, or we're tired. We're not grounded when we've been hurt. So it's hard for us to show grace when it affects us and in our emotional state. We can't embody it when we aren't whole. And the other theme that I see is when someone is hurt, when the actions result in pain and suffering for self or others. It's hard to show grace in those moments when it's intentional, when there's injustice, when people are taken advantage of, cruelty. Those are the two big themes of when it's the hardest to show grace, when we're not well or when there is pain and suffering from the actions. But that's what grace is there to do in that moment, to paint those gold streets and to mend and seek reconciliation. We could probably keep going on this for a while, but we're going to jump ahead to the next one. So where do we see grace happening in the world? Because it does happen around us. We see moments every day when we are watching children play together, or we see two adults have a conversation who had the last time they were together had an argument. We see those moments happening in life. We see the way we come to aid one another. So where are some specific places that we see it? I'll start reading them aloud as they come in. Only in the back, stories that show ordinary people interacting, not in the media, everywhere. After tragedies, when communities come together. Here in colleagues and ministry colleagues and at the APCE annual event. Teachers giving of themselves to students in our home and yoga classes and schools and nature and prayer from the children, inclusion of LGBTQIA and willingness with the Matthew 25 focus and questions and one-on-one and small group interactions and welcoming of refugees and immigrants and asking questions. We have a whole nother page. And worship. When people keep showing up, aid organizations, when you react in love. These are the gold streaks that paint the world. These moments, these situations. When we see reconciliation happening, reconciliation with Indigenous people, when we see God in one another. These are the gold streaks. These are what give us hope. These are what allow us to continue embodying faith. It's still showing me people are typing, so I didn't want to move on. When children forgive, and you ask someone how someone is within actually wanting to know the answer. How often do we walk by somebody and say, hey, how are you? But we really don't care. It's just the nice thing to do. And it's like a passing, and the other person like answers it beyond fine, and we're like caught off guard. Has that happened to anybody before? Or if we're the one answering it truly and they don't seem to really be listening. Having someone truly listen when we acknowledge grief. Yes. All right. So another thing that I heard in y'all's conversations was different ages are really hard and some are easier for showing grace. So let's take a poll and see what age is the hardest to model grace for. And you can define what these ages are in your context ministry, because we all kind of define them slightly differently. Middle adults is pulling ahead. That is a stage of life where we don't show grace to ourselves in the middle adult world, do we? It's the busy season of parenting, of career building, of trying to do all those things that society says you're supposed to do to be a successful adult in this world. It's hard at that age, isn't it? Okay, so thinking about these different ages, I noticed that children didn't make it on there at all. They're probably the easiest to show it for, right? Preschool age toddlers, we have all these books that show that we can read to them about grace. I'll Always Love You was one my kids loved. Everywhere You Go, I'll Be There With You. I misquoted that title, but that theme, Love You Forever. Yeah.
Love me if you need me.
Mm-hmm. There's so many books that we could, that theme shows up in all sorts of them. And all we have to do to model grace for that age is love them and to show up and be present with them. And they see it because they're learning so many things and they fall and we pick them up and we help them on their way and they see that and experience grace. And then in the elementary age, that life stage for them, they're so focused on what is just and fair and making sure everybody has exactly the same thing, the same exact number of Skittles for each, or the ice cream scoops are the same size, or everybody gets a certain number of terms. It's very one or the other. There's no middle ground for anything. So if you do something wrong, there's a consequence. And if you do this, that happens, and that has to happen for everybody. I have two boys and they're close in age. They like to fight. And one day my younger one was in the car and he said something to me. Oh, we were going to pick up his brother and he said, "Oh, good, I'm glad we're getting Liam so I can hit him." And I was like, "Why? You don't hit your brother." But he hit me. And I was like, "Well, no." And he's like, "But I need to get revenge." And I was like, "We don't practice revenge in this house. We practice grace and forgiveness." So like, even at that young age, like they already see that there's wrongs can be righted with more wrongs. And so we have that option there to start showing them grace, to show them that we can forgive and mend without more physical violence. And then in the adult, once we hit kind of the adults, we move and start to see that there is all of this muddy middle of the world and that things aren't quite so cut and dry. We start seeing grace in a new way. We start seeing those gold streaks mending and we work to embody. And we find that there's a fluidness of it, and we start seeing and creating programs like restorative justice programs where wrongs are mended without creating more harm and more hurt. And we acknowledge that there's grief and there's pain. We don't push it aside and we work to mend and paint those gold streaks. So as we are embodying grace and learning this language of grace, we change it based on who we're interacting with. What questions do y'all have? I have a microphone if anyone has one.
I will very loud now. I appreciated very much that last comment that you made, the story about your son.
Mhm.
That statement, we don't practice revenge in this house, we practice grace and forgiveness. What other statements like that? We put in our collective box to pull out when we need it. That's beautiful. I wish I had been aware enough when my kids were little to say something like that. You know, I probably said some some things that were, you know, hopefully constructive and helpful in that, but not those words.
Right.
What are the things that can we, you know, what are some other things we can say?
So the question is for our Zoom to make sure they heard. The question is along the lines of, we don't practice revenge in this house, we practice grace and forgiveness. What are some other statements we can have in our wheelhouse to pull out in those moments? That is a really good question. Do you have an answer or another question?
Is somewhat of an answer, because I was very critical and I assumed that when you said something to a child, that they would obey you and do it exactly, you know, I just was in a fantasy world. And so I was doing that, and then I realized that that was totally wrong. And so I told my daughter to say to me when I got on my critical self, just to say, just love me, Mom. And so she did, and I collapsed, you know, forgot the horribleness of what I had just done.
Yes, that's a really good, important reminder. I think the other thing also along that is in my house, I talk a lot about natural consequences. So no matter what you choose, there's a consequence, and it's a positive consequence or a negative consequence. And so we didn't make consequence a bad word. And so when they get in trouble or they do something, like the consequence for cutting the hair is this, you got to go get a different haircut. But a consequence for breaking the bowl, like there's no reason to get upset and in trouble for a mistake, but there are consequences and we have to work through them. I think that helps, is reminding that there's every action results in something. And so maybe, especially with older kids and teens and adults, we can think through, well, if I go down this path, if I go down the revenge path, what's going to keep coming? What's next after that? What's next? Or if I go down the grace path, what's coming? What's going to happen? What's going to change? Others.
Candace, who's on Zoom, wanted to add that she says, in our family, we ...
Sorry. In our family, we ... So what do you that means that you have to know what in your family are your core values. What are those things that you practice and really want to teach to yours?
This conversation is making me remember that when one of my children was a young teenager, people got under her skin and she'd come home like, oh, why did she do this? Why is she like that? Why did she wear this? Blah, blah, blah. And my answer became every day, grace and space. Everybody deserves grace and space. So move yourself away if you cannot be next to this person, but also then just give them grace.
That's beautiful. I might steal that one. Grace and space.
We had a rule in our house when our children were teenagers that we never left the house without a hug. And it didn't matter if we had argued or had a blowout about homework not being done. They never left the house without a hug.
We'll come up for Zoom in just a second.
Using that same example of your child, and we don't practice revenge. We do grace and forgiveness. How do we move that into the public sphere, in politics, in military, and all? It just seems that we do the opposite. and it really concerns me.
I think that's a really good question of how do we move this into the public sphere? I don't know the specific answer to that other than we practice it, we model it, and it starts to, as the more and more that we collectively model it in the world around us, it will rub off and speaking up. And I think that's where the courage is grace under pressure comes in and really showing it. I don't think that really answers your question, but that's such a big question. I don't know the answer to. So it's a really good one we need to keep having conversations about. Go.
Another one from Zoom, Brooke says, even Jesus turned over tables and got hangry. Perfection isn't what life is about. It's how we react and what we learn from our mistakes.
Yes, we have to remember Jesus flipped those tables. Sometimes that is grace, is coming in and flipping those tables and showing where the gold streaks need to be painted.
I really like the idea of embracing mistakes and mistake making as a phrase, but my new table mate and friend had this idea about moving it to the public, and I really feel like every time we point our finger, we have three fingers pointing back at us. And one of the ways I think we can move grace to the public is induce a little humor, a little fun. There's so much anger, and I think grace can be a fun endeavor. And so as a mom, I have to praise my kids and my husband for doing that, because I'm funny in some ways, but they're really funny. And so when kids would be mean to my kids, they would come up with funny, quippy comebacks that were hopefully a little more graceful than the anger, revenge kind of thing. And that was a daily in the van home from school sort of thing. And I think it moves it to the public if there's a critical mass of that sort of energy.
I was gonna say one thing that's been on my mind a lot lately is just, and I think we talked about it a little bit, and I saw it up there a little bit, but you know, the way that what we consume in terms of like news and media kind of colors our perception of what the world is. You know, so we see these news feeds where all these bad things are happening and all these people are being wicked and evil, and it colors our perception that then when we see these bad things happen, we have this assumption then, you know, that when a hurricane hits and levels a city, that the city will then turn into lawlessness and rioting and looting. And it doesn't allow us to see the space for what is actually happening. You know, people getting in their boats and helping people get from their homes to safe space. You know, or it colors that there's not really looting. It's just people doing what they can to make sure people have access to food and basic medical necessity. But, you know, the absence of grace and how that can really color our perception of the world and lead us to act on that perception or make judgments based on that.
I know when COVID started, I was overwhelmed with information coming in, that it was all consuming and so much that I had to like cut off and say, you can't look at this anymore for so long. You've got the information, you got to make a decision, you got to act. No more information. And I think it's that same, like the information we bring in to ourselves affects our wholeness and our ability to embody. And if we're not whole, we don't see humor. If we're anxious about something or not able to practice grace ourselves, then it's going to just continue to spiral down the other way. sometimes, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, I thought your story, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, about how you gave your daughter a way to say grace is needed. I thought that was pretty brilliant, because we talk quite a bit about how do we extend grace to others. But then, we see the large number of things that have come up in the slides about not extending grace to ourselves. And so I wonder if there's language that is needed, and this is kind of looking at through a new lens, language needed on how do we seek grace? Like, a lot of the kinds, how do we give it, which is obviously incredibly important, but how do, especially children or even into adulthood, how might we go about giving people the tools to ask for grace, or to acknowledge that this is a time I could really use some grace?
That's a really good question. I think for me in my life, at this stage with 2 small children, one of the things that I do is I don't always hold it together and may lose my temper and yell and scream, and but to recognize that I need space and and say, I'm going to go 5 minutes and I will come back, is one way of saying I need a break. Or we had a lot of the mornings where when I would take them to school, it was a lot of yelling. We're going to be late. We're going to be late. Get your shoes on. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. And so there were a lot of mornings where we're driving to school and I apologized for yelling. And it's so hard to apologize for your actions in response to someone else's without saying, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but I need you to do this next time. And so I think learning and working on saying, I'm sorry, period, and not elaborating in that moment, like give it some time, using those I statements as much as possible. And these are more in interpersonal relationships that this works. Like I was overwhelmed, or coming in and recognizing that you might have snapped at your friend when they said something and been like, wait, an hour later, I didn't handle that well. I'm really sorry. This is what was going on with me. And making space for people to have whatever emotions they have in those moments. Okay, you just.
I noticed that a lot of people, it looked like in one of the questions, seek grace in nature, in yoga classes, in worship. And I find for myself, if those are the places that it seems to be abundant, that when I need to take a break or I need to fill my cup, those are some of the places that I should probably go. And even with my children and even with the youth or the children, just to get a break, and maybe be in nature or,
Taking those Sabbath moments. Yes. When I am overwhelmed and feeling ungrounded, I like to go into nature, to be overwhelmed by nature and to look up and see something beautiful and remember that the world is bigger than just whatever's going on in my life.
Grace benefits the mental health of both the giver and the receiver.
Absolutely.
I too appreciated the comment about giving your child something, a tool that helped both of you. And I wonder what it would be like. My kids are grown and gone, but I wonder what it would look like if when we're dealing with our younger people, if we revisited some of those conversations and asked, how could I have done that better? How could I have handled that better? Or what would have been more helpful to you in that moment? I mean, depending on the age and stage of the child, but I think encouraging them and helping them to articulate things, to really have them pause for a minute and say, wait, something went wrong. There's a big reaction to it. Really, what could have gone better? And how could, that if we can help ourselves to respond better and help teach the next generations how to respond better, that might be helpful.
I think this kind of goes back to your question about how we get it into the world and out of churches and families. And I think it's going to take time. It's going to start with those younger generations that aren't quite so set in their ways and are still really moldable. And when that critical mass starts to act this way in the world, it will continue to bleed into and seep into the souls of others. But it requires us to take that step back and ask the hard questions of what went wrong in this interaction, what could have been better.
Your practice of like self-timing out, when we start to see world leaders standing on a screen and someone asks them a question and they self-time out in front of our eyes, it's a culture shift and it's evolutionary and we don't have it yet. So you're right about it. It's just like, and I can remember Barack Obama self-timing out one time in the press room. And I'm not trying to grandstand any particular leader, but I had never seen it before. And it wasn't a moment of anger. It was a moment of emotion. Like someone was retiring and he was struck with the emotion and he said, I'm going to take a minute. It was giving himself grace in front of the entire world. And I'm not trying to grandstand. I'm thinking of leaders who've that practice of self-time out is so important.
This is a hard practice to learn, and I'm not always the greatest at it. Like it is hard to know what you're feeling in the moment, but I think that we have to change the conversation around mental health and around emotions in the larger culture. That emotions aren't a bad thing. Like there are no bad emotions. An emotion is a involuntary response. We don't control our emotions. They just happen. But we are told that anger is bad. We're told it's not good to be sad. And so we hide those. And then we act in ways we've hid them so deep, we don't even realize we're carrying them with us in the ways that they're affecting. And so changing that conversation around emotions, I think, and learning to take that moment and will help get it into the world as well. So y'all probably heard this quote before, but when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. And I think it applies to adults too, right? So it's our job to be prepared to be graceful and calm and take a moment instead of just jumping into their chaos and their anger and being reactive. I went on the civil rights tour yesterday and was just remembering and thinking about their plan of being peaceful to people who were not being peaceful to them, and kind of that bigger picture of it's not something that just happened. They practiced people pulling their hair and yelling at them and blowing smoke in their face, and they practiced not being reactive before they went out and did it. And I was just thinking, how much of that should we embody? Not just expecting to be able to handle chaos, but when we're not in the midst of it, being mindful enough to practice and reflect, how can we be peaceful? How can we offer grace so that we don't just get in the moment and expect ourselves to just, oh, well, I'll just be graceful. I'll just be peaceful. I'll just be kind. But really thinking through it before, if you know you have a tough meeting coming up, think about it and pray about it and be prepared with strategies of how to be peaceful, how to be graceful to those people. Thank you for that reminder that we have to practice this. It's not, we've talked a lot about showing it and teaching it to others, but before we can even do that, we have to practice it and do that hard work. and to admit when we make a mistake. And I think as we start admitting our mistakes in a way that is matter of fact, without beating ourselves up and moving forward, we are able to practice grace in a new way. I think we have time for one more comment from Zoom. Okay. Okay. Sometimes in those moments, we will have to spell it out. The other day I was at the bus stop and it was a cold morning and my kids were sitting in the car with me, and a friend got in with us, and she reached up to turn the light on in the car, the little reading lights, and it pushed out. And I went, oh, without even catching myself. And I was like, okay, well, can you get it turned off? We need to make sure it can turn off so my car battery doesn't die. And I could just see her face just fall. And I had to turn around and be like, you are not in trouble. It was an accident. It happens, but we just need to make sure that these other things don't roll through. So sometimes we do have to use our words as we're modeling grace so that they can really get it. My light did go off, but now it's just rolling around in the roof of my car. Thank y'all. This was a really good conversation. I hope y'all got some answers and more questions possibly to continue the conversation in your context and take it home. This is my contact information if anybody wants it. And if I can figure out how to get this slideshow and all the results from the website I did this through, I will email it to y'all and possibly put it on the APCE website if that is option. So on your way out, I have emails. Double check that yours is typed right. Or if you were not signed up for this course, then write it on here or send it in the Zoom chat. And I'd like to pray us out. God of grace, we give thanks for opportunities to be here, to grow, to learn, to have the tough conversations about grace and what it means for us as we receive it from you, share it with others, share it with ourselves, and seek to transform the world with the grace. Pour out your Spirit upon all those in this workshop to be painters of your gold streaks of grace through the world and all that we do. Help us to learn to embody it and to practice grace so that the language of grace oozes from our souls in all that we do. Amen.